This afternoon I will focus my lecture on the modern development of optical interferometry, and this will be mainly a description of the current interferometer existing in the world and the main science program that this interferometer are doing, at least in the last decades. So there are typically mainly 4 interferometers working today in the world. So you probably know the one from ESO with what we call the VLTI, Very Large Telescope Interferometer, that is located in Chile on the Cerro Paranal. And this interferometer is working for more than about 20 years now, and I will give you more detail about that. So the second major one is the Chara Array in California, above in the Mount Wilson Observatory above Los Angeles. And this is a very famous place because there is here the 100-inch telescope where Michelson made the first stellar angular diameter measurement. Then there is one interferometer that is in Arizona, very close to Flagstaff, in fact, which is the NPOI, Navy Precision Optical Interferometer. So, in fact, this one is a kind of survivor of the pioneers interferometer that have been developed in the 80s, 90s, and this one is still in operation with regularly some improvement in the instrumentation plan. And there is a new one that is currently under construction, which is called the Magdalena Ridge Observatory. It's in New Mexico, in the United States also. So you see we have 3 interferometers in the United States and 1 in Chile, coming from the European countries. So if we look now more in detail to the NPOI, the Navy Precision Optical Interferometer, this is an aerial view of the interferometer. So you see the baseline here with the white shape here. This is here, this long building is the building where are located the long delay line for compensating the delay between a telescope that will be here and here, for example, on the very long baseline. And this building here is where all the instrumentation is located, instrumentation and the control room. So you see this is a quite large interferometer with the longest baseline with 440 meters typically. But unfortunately, as you will see, this long baseline is not in operation at that time because for having a 400-meter baseline, you need very long delay line to compensate the delay and to have to stabilize the coherence of your interferometer, as I explained yesterday. And this part of the interferometer is in construction for many years. So this interferometer has been majorly funded by the oceanographer of the Navy and Office of Naval Research. So it has been at the beginning dedicated to measurement of the position of stars, which could be very accurately determined with an interferometer by astrometry, global astrometry. So you are measuring the position of fringes between a reference star and another star, and you can make a very accurate measurement of position of star. And that has been supported by the Office of Naval Research because after the Hipparcos mission, where we have had for the first time a quite large number of accurate parallaxes of stars, something like 100,000 parallaxes have been obtained by the NPOI, you know that after many years, the quality of the coordinate of stars is degrading because of the proper motion of stars. And then it's important to improve the quality of astrometric catalogs by continuing of measurement of astrometry of stars. Of course, with the arrival of the data release of the Gaia mission, this part of the NPOI is less important, of course. So, but this that was the initial reason of funding this interferometer by the Navy. But it has been also a collaboration between the USNO and the Lowell Observatory, where the interferometer is located. And in fact, there has been also some instruments that have been funded by the National Science Foundation, so for general purpose astrophysics with interferometry. And that's interesting because this array could reach very high precision in the measurement because of the very high quality of the installation due to the precision needed for the astrometric program here. So the Lowell Observatory is now the main operator of the interferometer, and we can access for observation to this interferometer mainly through collaboration with colleagues working there. So the interferometric community in the world is not very large, and you know almost everybody, and in fact this is almost true in any astronomical community. It's you rapidly know the people, and you can access the collaboration. There is no really open time on this interferometer, but as I told you, there is easy access through collaboration for specific programs. This is also very interesting because this interferometer, as we can see on the previous picture, has a very dense array of telescope locations. So at the total, there is 10 very small telescopes, 15 centimeters. But for the astrometric measurement, there is a possibility of having 4 or 6 telescopes in a very dense area, something like 30, 40 meters baseline. And that is very interesting because it's very complementary for observation, for example, on the Chara array, as I will explain you later, where the minimum baseline of the Chara array is 30 meters, which is quite large for measuring stars. So that's very interesting to combine, in fact, observation from this interferometer to the other interferometer. Of course, it's in the northern hemisphere, but if you are looking at stars that are in the galactic plane, then you can observe the star both from the NPOI, which is in the northern hemisphere, and the VLTI, which is in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so the main instrument is what they call the classic combiner. It's based on avalanche photodiode with temporal modulation. So yesterday I explained you that you have a way to encode the fringes by temporally modulating the fringes. So it permits to go to single pixel detector like avalanche photodiode. And they offer spectral resolution giving 16 spectral channels over the visible band, which is very interesting because when you go from this 850 nanometer to 550 nanometer, you see that you typically almost change the wavelength by a factor 2, not really a factor 2, but almost a factor 2, and that's increase the angular resolution, because the angular resolution of your interferometer is B over lambda, and when lambda is decreasing, the spatial resolution B over lambda is increasing. So with the 550 nanometer wavelength, they can reach very interesting spatial resolution. And when you have 16 channels over this band, then you make in one observation simultaneously 16 measurements at different spatial frequency, because you have different B over lambda for the same baseline. So that's the way of boosting, in fact, the observation with an interferometer by using as many spectral channels as possible. Of course, this has to be compatible with the sensitivity of your array, and as this NPOI is using a small collector, that is a 15 centimeter collector, the limiting magnitude is about 5.5, and in fact, you can go to higher spectral resolution. So there is almost no combination of high angular resolution and spectral resolution in that interferometer. It's mainly 16 channel in continuum at different spatial frequency that you reach. So there is another instrument that has been recently developed 3 or 4 years ago, which is called Vision, and it's a modern instrument based on optical fibers for improving the quality of the measurement with the interferometer. That's an interesting feature that has been developed for optical interferometry, is the use of single mode fiber. So instead of just doing the direct combination of light coming from the two telescopes, where the light coming from each of the telescopes may have some residual perturbation coming from the atmospheric turbulence or from the aberration of the telescope. And so when you combine the light from two telescopes with aberration or atmospheric turbulence, the quality of the superposition of the two wavefronts is not very good. What we have done for many years now, and mainly in the infrared, but is now done also in the visible, is to inject the light coming from each telescope to a single mode fiber. And then at the output of the single mode fiber, you only obtain the mode of the fiber, which is a Gaussian beam. And the only parameter of this Gaussian beam is the intensity of the beam, which is related to the quality of the injection of the light in the single mode fiber, and of course the phase of the wave. It depends if you light coming from the telescope 1 has a delay with respect to the telescope 2, then you have a delay, a phase in the beam. So that's very interesting, because after going through the two optical fiber, then you are completely your wavefront are very clean, and you can make a perfect interferometer. You just have to monitor the flux in each of the fiber and monitor the phase. So that's very interesting. So this instrument is using 6 fibers. It permits to combine six aperture of the interferometer, and they offer 2 spectral resolution. So it has been tested and commissioned on the interferometer a few years ago. And it's not really operational at that time, because the sensitivity, which is expected to be around 6, it will highly depend on the possibility of improving the aperture of the array. So the current infrastructure, you see, small 15 centimeter siderostat. There is, not 15, 12 centimeters, so it's even smaller. So there is 6 for imaging, which imaging means that you can move the siderostat on different locations. You can take this siderostat from here to here to here to change the baseline. And there are 4 astrometric aperture. And why they are called astrometric aperture? Because they are at very well-known position. You can't move this aperture from that position to another one, because for making very accurate angle measurement of star, you need to have a perfect definition of your baseline. So you need to know very well the baseline, because if you don't know the baseline, you will make an error when interpreting the phase shift of your fringes on the angle of the star. So when you do astrometry, you need to measure the precision of the baseline with the precision at the level of the nanometer. So it's why these astrometric aperture are fixed. So there are 6 variable optical delay line, and the long delay line are not yet in operation. So they are planning to install, in fact, they have the budget for installing 3 1 meter, or even, I think now it's 2 meter class telescope. They got a support from the Navy for using the NPOI for the imaging of geostationary satellites. It's the possibility that many countries are looking for making images of satellites from the ground. And for that, you need very large aperture, because the geosat are quite faint, and they are also quite small, so you need long baseline. So only an interferometer from the ground can make such images of geostationary satellite. So that's one of the telescopes is on site, and I think the second one has been arrived during the summer. So that's it for the Navy prototype precision optical interferometer. And now we can have a short tour of the Magdalena Ridge Observatory. So it's close to Socorro in New Mexico. And in fact, is from the top of the Magdalena Ridge, you can see the location of the very large array, the array with the 27 antenna in the centimetric domain for the radio. So this project is under construction for many years. It has been funded for at the beginning, I think at the end of the previous decade. It's considered as a 10 telescope interferometer with 1.4 meter, and the telescope can move again on the baseline here up to 350 meters. And it's really this mission. This instrument has been really designed for making image of stars. So the core of the science cases are the possibility of observing active galactic nuclei, which are very compact objects, and with a goal of having a magnitude in the H band of around 14, that gives almost 100 targets that could be observed with this interferometer. And that's, as you will see, mainly hold interferometer. That's the two driving science case for interferometry. This is the study of active galactic nuclei and the star and planet formation. So here, this is mainly for example, the detection of substellar companion, and of course emission line and the image of disk, which is something really important. And so here, this is a simulation for this study of mass loss in lead type star. So the situation is not yet completely. So this instrument is absolutely not operational for the moment. They have one telescope on site, and they are waiting for additional budget for completing the system. They have got a new support from the NSF for the deployment of the first 3 telescopes, and they have got a lot of money also from the Air Force Research Lab for again the imaging geostationary satellites. So they are looking for partners, of course. So if you are interested. But that's a long story already for this Magdalena Ridge Observatory. They've got a strong support at the beginning. They have started very fast, and then they are waiting for more money to come. So now we go to the VLTI. So this is on Cerro Paranal with the 4 8-meter telescope. This is the VISTA telescope here, and the 4 1.8-meter telescope on the platform of the VLTI. So with the VLTI, we can combine up to 4 telescopes simultaneously. There is no instrument at that time able to combine more than 4 telescopes, but all the instruments now are able to combine 4 telescopes simultaneously. That could be either the 4 8-meter telescope or either the 4 80s, what we call the auxiliary telescope. This auxiliary telescope is 1.5 meter. And so the interest of the UT is, of course, the sensitivity, because you are using 8-meter class telescope. But the problem, of course, of the UT is that they are fixed on the Paranal mountain, so you can't change the baseline. With the auxiliary telescope, you can move the telescope on the platform on a discrete location, and you can change the baseline from, in fact, 8 meter, so very at the same dimension of the mirror of the UT, up to 140 meter at that time, and the platform of Cerro Paranal is able to accommodate even up to 200 meter baseline, but this is not offered for the moment because of limitation in the optical train of the delay line. So here we have the delay line for compensating the delay from the different telescopes for the baseline from 11 to 140 meters. And this is the focal laboratory where all the instruments are installed. And the instrument suite here can cover from 1.5 micron to 12 microns. So the instruments that are currently in the lab of the of the VLTI. So Amber is no longer offered. It was one of the first generation instruments. It has been commissioned in 2003, and it has been decommissioned last year, 1 year ago, after 15 years of good services. And in fact, it has been removed to allow the installation of new instruments. So this one is done. At that time, he was recombining up to 3 telescopes and using different kind of spectral resolution. I will speak about scientific results obtained with Amber later on. So Pioneer is, at the beginning, it was a visitor instrument built by the Observatoire de Grenoble in France. It was, in fact, a continuation of pioneering work that has been done on one of the pioneering interferometer in Mount Hopkins, on the IOTA interferometer. The particularity of this instrument is that it is using integrated optic device for the combination of beam. So instead of using classical optics, like I showed you yesterday, for making the common mirror, for forming the common focus of all the telescope and forming the fringes, in fact, the light of each telescope go through fibers inside an integrated optic device, which is a piece of glass of typically this size, which all the interferometric function in the chip, and you enter with 4 input and you go out with the interferometric output and the photometric output. So that's very convenient because it's very stable. When you have inject the light in your fiber, you don't need EV alignment. So for Amber, for example, one of the limitations was that this instrument was very big with very huge optics, etc., and that was a nightmare for maintaining the alignment of the instrument. So it's why the people in the community have tried to find solution to improve the stability of the instrument. It was also designed, the design of integrated optic chip was also made for 20 years ago for the purpose of space interferometry. That was the idea of simplifying and making very compact interferometer to send in a satellite. So Pioneer is combining 4 telescopes in the H-band with almost no spectral resolution. It's a very sensitive and very high quality measurement, as you will see. So Gravity is a newcomer it's already 2 years that it is installed in the Focal Lab, and Matisse has been commissioned last year and is, I think, offering the first open observation this year. So Gravity is designed for very specific soundscapes about the astrometry for the star surrounding the galactic center in our galaxy, and he used the K-band with different spectral resolution. And the main characteristic of this instrument is the sensitivity, which has been pushed a lot in order to improve the sensitivity of interferometry using not only adaptive optics on each telescope, but also dedicated fringe tracker for stabilizing the fringing and making long exposure. Matisse is an instrument working in the thermal infrared from the 3.5 to 12 micron with different spectral resolution, and that's an instrument really dedicated to imaging of disk or young stellar object, or also any kind of AGN, and also mainly for disk, in fact, which is very interesting because the resolution you obtain with Matisse, with the VLTI and this instrument in this band, is very similar to the spatial resolution you can obtain with the ALMA interferometer in the millimetric domain, and that's very nice complementarity in terms of science when observing the same object, typically the protoplanetary disk, by Matisse in the thermal infrared and by ALMA in the millimetric domain. So this is a representation of the wavelength versus angular resolution for the instrument suite of the VLTI, and you see, of course, that this is the angular resolution of one UT, 1 8-meter telescope, and you see that all this part of the diagram is dominated, of course, by the interferometric instrument up to the VLTI angular resolution. You see the very interesting, very large spectral coverage of Matisse, which is very interesting for many astrophysical programs.
Sorry, the letters above the plot are referred to filters?
Sorry?
The letters above the plot, UV, V.
Yeah, this is the photometric band. Yeah, this is the photometric band. Usually what we call, yes, the element band, you see that's the domain of Matisse, it's from 3.5 to 12 microns. In the visible, we are from the BVR. This is ultraviolet here. And this is close infrared and near infrared and thermal infrared. And this is, of course, the instruments that are on the UT telescope. I will make now a short tour of the recent science program that have been done with this instrument. So the first one is about young stellar objects, and that's observation that have been made at the beginning with the Amber-only instrument, and the detection, thanks to the combination of spectral resolution and high angular resolution, the determination of jets for this source by Amber with the position of the elongation of the jet versus the inner rim of the YSO. And recently, by combining observation with Amber a long time ago, so it was in 2012, and observation with gravity in 2016, they have combined the information from both instruments in order to resolve the massive YSO as a binary, in fact. And this is an image, a reconstructed image, combining the data from gravity and Amber. And that's very interesting to see this binarity, which is also the fact that the link between the disk of these two young stellar objects is very interesting for the mutual interaction between the disk. Interferometry has been also used from the very beginning for Cepheids. One very interesting aspect of Cepheids is the pulsation, of course. And when you are looking to Cepheids with a spectrometer, and you are looking to the radial velocity change of the Cepheid, because star is pulsating, so at some time the light is coming in your direction or going back in your direction, so you measure variation of radial velocity. But if you look at the Cepheids, at the pulsating Cepheid in the plane of the sky, you see that the size of the star is changing with time. So combining the change of radial velocity and combining the change of size, you can determine the distance of the Cepheid because when you measure the change in angular diameter, you measure a variation of angular dimension, and when you integrate the variation of the radial velocity, you measure a variation in linear coordinates, in kilometers, when you integrate the radial velocity as a function of time. So combining the two information give you a direct determination of distance of Cepheid. So it has been used, these Cepheids have been, this is bright star also, they have been used for improving the distance scale in the universe by calibrating the 0 point of the period luminosity of Cepheids. But very recently, in fact, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it has been discovered that the Cepheids, which are also very, very big stars, have a huge mass loss, in fact, and that with improved quality of measurement, we can in fact detect a variation from a single star. It's not only a star just pulsating, changing the size and pulsating like that. It's also a star with surrounded by dust, in fact. So the fact that the data are good enough to see the change in the model of the disk has permitted to understand the mass loss of Cepheids. So we don't know exactly of what is in this envelope surrounding the Cepheids, but we know that almost in all Cepheids we have this envelope, and that's very important to understand because it may bias the period luminosity relation of Cepheids, which is one of the major, at least galactic calibration of the distance scale in the universe. So that's thanks to the interferometric observation with very high precision that we have been able to see this change. One other aspect also of combination of angular resolution is the observation of the detection of the fraction of binarity in massive stars, mainly O, B, A, and B stars, and that have been observed at the beginning with a single telescope with the adaptive optics system on one of the UT telescope, and it has been completed recently by the interferometric observation. And in fact, the combination of the observation at very high angular resolution and the intermediate angular resolution has permitted to demonstrate that almost, at least in the survey that have been done for something like, I think, 100 or 200 stars of O stars. In fact, all these O stars are in multiple systems. So that was considered as, this is very important because it changed the way you are understanding the evolution of these massive stars. Of course, binarity is very interesting in interferometry, and you will see tomorrow with a small example that it's a very, very interesting way of doing interferometry. And in fact, combining the observation of binaries with an interferometer and with a spectrometer permits you to measure the mass, not only the mass ratio between the components, but the mass of each star. That's very interesting to combine, and because we know very little masses in the universe. So that's a reconstructed image obtained again with the Pioneer instrument for interacting binary. And you see the deformation of the giant star here. That was really interesting, and the mass ratio was quite unexpected for this kind of star, with the M giant completely distorted by the fact that there is some mass exchange and interacting binary. So that's also a lot of program that has been done in that kind of observation. Coming back to young stars, so observation of the very central inner rim of the disk of young stellar object. This is something where we think that this is the region of planetary formation, and the goal, of course, is to go up to the first astronomical unit of disk of young stellar object, and that's at the limit of the current program. There is a few close young stellar object where it can be done, but for doing that, you have to go in the infrared because it's where these objects are the brightest. But when you go in the infrared for resolving the inner astronomical unit, you need to go to a baseline of 500 meter TPT or 1 kilometer. So there is few objects that have been observed with the understanding of this inhomogeneity in the inner rim, and that generates a lot of discussion about, of course, about the model. B stars, and Marcello can comment about that. He has been part of this kind of program on B stars, so that's very interesting. There has been a survey of B star made by colleagues at Observatoire de la Côte d'Azur, and what you see here is the spectrum with the, I think this is the bracket gamma line in emission, and here you can see, in fact, the behavior of the visibility function. And you see this famous shape, and here is the differential phase. So differential visibility and differential phase, and that's this kind of signature here in the S, what we call the S shape of the phase, differential phase, is completely is directly related to the velocity field in the disk of the BE stars, and it has been demonstrated by colleagues that almost all the disks of BE star are compatible with Keplerian rotation. And there is a lot of work that has been done. There is combination of observation with the VLTI and with the Chara array, and that's very nice modeling of all this observation. Yeah. About HEN, I already speak a little bit. So there was some observation on many AGN. Almost, I think there is not so many, but typically most 20 AGN that have been observed with the VLTI, plus also observation made by the Keck interferometer that is now completely closed, in fact. But there has been the possibility to have the determination of a relation between the radius and the luminosity, and the fact also that between AGN of type 1 and type 2 there is no morphological differences. They are compatible with the classical model of HEN. It is a question of point of view, in fact, in the system. Of course, what we have not been able for a moment to go is to go into more detail in the broadline region of the AGN or in the narrow line region, which require improved sensitivity, because you need to go to higher spectral resolution to separate the different region of the spectrum. So that was a short kind of program that has been done with the VLTI in the past, and now I will introduce you the new gravity instrument. So gravity has been started about 10 years ago, with 12 years ago, I would say, with the main science goal was to continue the astrometric measurement of the motion of star in orbits around the galaxy, the center of the galaxy, and in order to have a better determination of the mass of what was supposed to be a black hole in the center of our galaxy. So this program has been started at the beginning with observation with single telescope with the adaptive optics, and the famous observation by the group of Professor Genzel in Germany, where you can see the motion of stars around the galactic center. But the precision was not enough to completely have a good determination of the mass of the center core where the stars are orbiting. So it's why this instrument has been designed. It's for doing the astrometry at a level of 10 microwatt second, which is very difficult because it requires control of aberration, the position of the image, the pupil, the metrology at the nanometer level in all the instruments. So there is this instrument has been installed with a lot of laser metrology in all the optical paths of the VLTI in order to control that. And have also the necessity of going further in terms of sensitivity in order to find the stars that are the closer to the center of the galaxy. So there is a lot of technical challenges that have been pushed by the progress in the technology with very low noise and very fast detector in the infrared, and also the fact that they are using, again, integrated optics and metrology laser. So the consortium has been it's 7 institutes in Europe, mainly working for 10 years. And as I told you, the main science cases has to understand the galactic center black hole and resolve a certain number of questions around surrounding this black hole. And also, this is a very good way to test the general relativity in strong field regime, which is the case around the galactic center black hole. So the difficulty also of gravity was that for reaching this science goal, you need to have an instrument stable for more than just a single observation. So there are a lot of programs that could be done in one shot, but many of the programs you need to go for a stability of 10 years in the instrument. So that's the main challenges that the team is facing today, is to maintain the quality of the measurement for many years. So that's at the end the fact that the flare that are surrounding the event horizon of the center black hole will be resolved at the end of the program also, and that's the difficulty of the program. So if we look at the galactic center with the very simplified model, in fact, there is a lot of different feature, in fact, with this circumstellar disk, but also the fact that we have, in fact, two disks in the center. And what we are doing now is to go further and look at the very core, where there is the center of the galaxy here, and there is also a cluster of stars here in orbit around the galactic center. And that's exactly what the people are willing to do. So this is an image of the galactic center in the H-band. And you see this is the location of the galactic center. And in fact, all these stars are in orbits around the galactic center. And the form of the orbit will give you an information on the mass of the black hole. And the closest star is this one, the S2 star. And if you look in the literature, you can see some observation of this star for many years. So this is a very, as you can see, this is a very short, very high zoom. In fact, in the center, this is typically 1 arc second here. So that's very small. So all the stars are completely mixed if you do not have angular resolution. So this is an image with an adaptive optics system, but with the interferometer, what we want is to measure the position of this star relative to the galactic center with a precision of 10 microarc second. So we have to go, we have to zoom again. So the way gravity is working, it uses bright magnitude around 10 source for the adaptive optics, for locking the field. And then inside the field here, where the galactic center, which has a magnitude around 15 to 12 to 18 typically, there is two bright source here with magnitude around 10, in fact, and the goal was within these 2 arc seconds, in fact, to lock the interferometer on this bright source and to integrate the interferometer looking at the galactic center. So you lock the fringes on these stars, and you know that the fringe will not move on this star, which is off axis, and you can integrate for a long time. So that's the way the interferometer is working. So with this, you can, if you see a change in the visibility function of this source with respect to this one, it means that this star is larger than this one, so you can measure the dimension of the galactic center. And if you see that the fringes are moving for this star with respect to this one, and if you know that everything is controlled in your interferometer so that you are perfectly sure that this is not an instrumental effect, then you can say that this source is moving with respect to this one. Or indeed, in fact, this one is fixed and this one is moving with respect to that one. So that's a measurement of astrometry. So this is, and we'll see if it works. This is a small video of the gravity instrument. It shows you the way that the light is using from going from the galactic center to the detector. You will see it's a very complicated instrument, in fact. So we arrive on Paranal. So the light is, of course, going to the 4-8-meter telescope, but we are just looking at one of the 8 meters here, primary mirror, secondary mirror, tertiary mirror. Then we go to the coup de beam. Here is the installation of the adaptive optics. Then we go in the optical tunnel, where we will see the delay line at the end. Back. This is the delay line. And we go now in the instrument. So in the instrument, there are separation of beam because you need to combine each beam with the forwarder. Then we go in one of the entrance of the instrument. Again, separation in polarization. And here we go inside the integrated device, and we end on the detector at the end. And you see the image of the detector. So that's a very, very complicated instrument, as you can imagine. It's more than 20 optics from the beginning. Okay, let's go to the next part. So the group has succeeded to make what I explained you just before, the measurement of the motion of the S2 star, the closest one to the galactic center, as a function of time. So this is the orbit with a very accurate measurement. And you see what is very interesting also, that they have been able to measure position of the star very close to the galactic center, which was not possible before that instrument. And that's, of course, the gravity is now at that level of precision. That was here the resolution before with the adaptive optic on Siegel telescope here. And now we are very close to the event horizon of the black hole. So very close to the 10 microarc second angular resolution limit. So this is the way gravity is working, adaptive optics working, and then we go to the center with the lock. We lock the fringes on the bright star here. So you see that's the fringe tracker on this star of magnitude 10. And we look after that to these stars. So that's the fringe signal. So before you lock the fringes, you see the fringe are moving a lot because of everything in the atmosphere, everything in the instrument. And then when you have the fringe on all 6 baseline, because you have 4 telescopes, you have 6 baseline, you lock the fringe and the fringe are stabilized. And then you can integrate for a long time. So it means that you can observe a star with magnitude 14 and make long integration of typically 1 or 2 minutes, whereas here you are making a short exposure of 5 or 10 milliseconds in order to control the position of fringes. And at the end, what you get is this. So the fringe here, that's the way the fringes are encoded on the 6 baseline with the 4 UT. You can stabilize the fringe here and integrate the fringes on the galactic center. So the first things for what they have determined with the gravity instrument is that the measurement of the position of S2 is a correct measurement of the astrometry between S2 and the galactic center. And that's true, of course, if there is no other sources around the galactic center, around these stars. So, and that has been calibrated with a very nice observation, and it shows that with a probability of 99%, there is no source brighter than a difference of magnitude of 3, typically between the S2 and 3. So it means that the quality of the astrometric measurement will be correct. That was the very beginning of the instrument to calibrate this. And at the end, they can measure some information on the galactic center. So that's visibility function as a function of the spatial frequency, the closure phase, and you see that there is a lot of signal demonstrating, in fact, the asymmetry in the image of the galactic center. So there is, of course, more to discuss about that, but you may have seen some recent publication on the result obtained by the group. This is the description of the first detection of Sagitta, but there is new papers last year, I think, with the very interesting results for gravity. So gravity is, of course, offered to the community, and you can access to time through the access to ESO, and ESO open time also for, I think there is 10 or 50% of time that is open time. This is the politics of open sky for ESO that permits to any countries, even countries that are not a member of ESO, to apply for time. So there is typically, I think, 15% of time that is offered in open sky, and typically I know that this is typically 7 or 8% of time that is obtained by US astronomers. Of course, with the fact that you cannot access to specific instrument in your country, you can justify that you access time on this other interferometer. So MATISS, no. MATISS is a very interesting instrument that has been installed last year on the VLTI, and the goal of this instrument is really to make images of disk. It's a cool instrument working in two domains of wavelengths in the LMN band. You have one cryostar for the LNM band and one for the N band, and this is the warm optics band bench where all the combination of beam is done before going to the detectors. So there is no really science result that have been published yet. It will come probably by the end of the year, but there have been also the interesting demonstration during the science verification time on the VLTI with the possibility of obtaining images of disk with the gap inside the disk for different configuration. And what is also interesting with MATISS, MATISS is provided with image reconstruction software, so it means that when you observe with MATISS with a few nights of observation, you can directly not only think to visibility, close your face, all these things, you get a reconstructed image directly with your interferometer. It's provided by ESO. So that's something that is very interesting for the community, because most of the people that are not familiar with interferometer don't want to take care about visibility, close your face, all these things. They want to have images, like for the ALMA interferometer, of course. So that's a big step forward for interferometer, is also for providing direct image reconstruction for interferometer. So that's the tour of the VLTI. We will now go to the Chara array. The Chara array is located on the Mo Wilson Observatory, close to Los Angeles. So it has been opened in 2000, in fact, with a dedication at that time, and just 5 years after, there will be the first science result on the fast rotator Regulus. So the Chara array is on the Mount Wilson with the 100-inch telescope with the solar tower, and you can see small telescope here. This is the south telescope, south in that direction, the east telescope, and the west telescope. And you see this large building here, where the delay line are, with the beam combiner facility is here, and this is the control room and offices. When you go observing there, that's very cool, because the Chara group offer you to stay in one of these houses here. So you are on the mountain. That's a very, very nice cottage with a very nice view here. Sometimes you have bears coming around there. That's not so cool, but it's very, very, very nice. It's very, very beautiful site, in fact. So in more detail, that's what I explained you. The light coming from the telescope is going to the beam combiner through evacuated pipe. That's interesting because it permits to avoid a little bit the fact that with an interferometer that is fixed on the ground and that is looking at a star that is not at the zenith, you may have a difference of air path in the interferometer. So by evacuating the pipes, transporting the light from the telescope to the beam combiner, it decreases the effect of dispersion generated by the difference of airspace in the different arms of the interferometer. That's a little bit more complicated, of course, because you have to install this light path, and the light path have to be very bright, of course, otherwise the light will not go. And sometimes there are some problems, because this is active region, of course, the region of Los Angeles is very active, and sometimes these pipes are are a little bit moving, so they have to realign the things. The Coulee trend going up to the instrument, and this is general view of the inside the beam combiner with the delay line here, and when you go out from the delay line, the light coming from the telescope is arriving by the bottom here to this periscope, through periscope in fact, and this mirror is sending the light in the delay line, and the light after the delay line is coming in the table here, and here you generate a certain number of functions to send the light for the visible and the infrared light in the different beam combiner in that part. So I think we have a movie with a short tour of the char array. You see the cart at the end, the long delay line, 44 meters, that give you 90 meters of delay, in fact, because it's this is the beam switcher where you can inside, and now we go in the instrument. This is the infrared instrument built by the Michigan University. This is the instrument built by the Georgia State University, and at the end we see the instrument that I have built a few years ago and that it's installed there. So the beam combiner we have on the char array is the one that has been built by the Georgia State University. This one has been built by the Observatoire de Paris. It's a very interesting fiber-based K-band interferometer with very high accuracy but low sensitivity. This one, Merck, and now it's a suite of, it has been divided in two instruments, Merck-X and MYSTIC. One Merck-X is dedicated to the GA and H-band, and one MYSTIC is dedicated to the K-band. So Vega is the instrument that I have installed 10 years ago with a 4 telescope combiner, and there are of course progress that have been done. So interesting feature of the char is the possibility of remote observing. So here is the remote location in Nice, in Sydney, in Atlanta. I don't remember where it is. Everywhere in the world you can make remote observation on the char array, thanks to the capacity of the array to be operated remotely. That's very, very interesting. Of course, you have on the mountain, and there is you can see this image from Atlanta. But you have small images where there is a night operator on the mountain, of course. So the recent development on the char array is the adaptive optics system, which will be very interesting because on 1 meter telescope with moderate adaptive optics, you can reach very nice performances. And so the program is completely funded and will be soon in operation. This is first test of the adaptive optics. You can recognize for those of you who know that the Shark-Hartmann sensor. So in fact, for each telescope, we have 2 adaptive optics system, which is a little bit more complicated. One is doing fast correction for the atmospheric turbulence, and one is doing low frequency correction for the static aberration, and for compensating the turbulence in the optical lab, in fact, which is important. So, interesting point also that I wanted to mention here is the fact that the char array has got good support from the National Science Foundation in order to open the access to the large community. So now there is a funding for the char array that allow to have typically, I think today it's 69 per year, open to the community at large for accessing to any of the instruments of the char array through the NOAO time allocation committee process. And so that you don't need to be part of the char array or either in collaboration with one of the instrument team. You can directly access to this time. And so I encourage you because it's not as complicated as you may imagine. And that's a plot that we usually use for demonstrating the good progress of optical interferometry. That's the number of referred science paper in blue for optical interferometry, starting with the first paper in 1974 by Antoine Labeyrie. And you see the growth of publication as a function of time. And in red here is the same plot for radio interferometry with a shift of 32 years, in fact. So you see the growing of the optical interferometry is very similar to the growing of radio astronomy with 30 years of delay. And that's very promising for the future of optical interferometry, of course, because we know that the radio interferometry is still very, very developed. And for optical interferometry, measuring stellar diameter is very seems to be very basic, but it has very good very interesting consequences. Many of the stars are not very well known, and in fact, there is a few stars where we have a good measurement of angular diameter. For example, up to now we have a catalog of measured diameter. This is typically 1,200 stars that have been measured, and just 7% of these stars have a diameter known with a precision better than 2%. So that's not so much. So and with the basic parameter of size, you can have a correct determination, better determination of the effective temperature, the luminosity, and that's the main ingredient of stellar modeling. And that's also another aspect of looking at stars is that we can now make direct imaging of stellar surfaces. So some of the results obtained with the CHAR array is the orbit of a binary with very high accuracy, and for this star, which is also known as spectroscopic binary, you can solve completely all the parameters, have not only the masses but the radius of the star, and that's very interesting for the coevolution of binary. Another example, also given by another group, with the image reconstruction obtained by this group with the Merck instrument on different time, and that's another aspect is to have a better determination of the behavior of the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram with the star measured by interferometry. So that's interferometric H-diagram. This is completing all the stars that have been measured with interferometry, and in black this is the star measured by the CHAR array. And if you look into more detail of these stars, we see in fact that this group has made a very interesting understanding of the star that are without planet or with planet, either for cool star or for all the stars. And that's a program that this group has made for understanding why certain stars have planet and other do not have planet. And that's a program that is continuing. This is very interesting. Stars also are known to be the rotating stars are known to be completely deformed with the pole brightening, what is called the von Siepel effect, with the gravity darkening. And this is the model. And here is an image obtained for Altair from the CHAR interferometer with this change of temperature between the equator and the pole due to the fast rotation and the deformation also of the equator. So this is the image of Altair again, and here is the different kind of star that have been observed with the Merck instrument as a function of the spectral type, and you see for fast rapid rotator, and that's in all cases you have this gravity darkening and this deformation that is also very interesting for models. Of course, there is also a program looking at spot on stars. And that's a difficult thing because spots are moving because of the rotation, because of the change of the behavior, and the temperature difference between the spot and the photosphere is sometimes very small. So you need very high quality, very good contrast in your measurement, and it's There is a few programs that have been done on that. It's quite hard, but it's possible. So there is a famous example, for example, by Rachel Rothenbacher, where this is for the cat giant Zeta Andromedae. The fact that they have observed, I think it was for more than 12 nights, and they have been able to. This is a projection of the surface of the star, and this is the reconstruction of the image of the star as seen from the interferometer as a function of the rotation phase, and that's interesting to see the motion of the feature that we can see on the disk, and that's a lot of information about the differential rotation, the temperature gradient on the surface. This observation were done in 2011, and this one were done in 2013 with better accuracy. And again, we can look at the spot moving as a function of the rotation here. Again, a binary with this beta Lyrae, famous object that has been seen during four nights, different nights, and you see the change in the system with this is a 13 days period binary, interacting binary with a lot of interesting feature like jets that has been observed a long time ago, detected a long time ago, and the impact of the accretion of matter between the two companions generate a hotspot on the surface of the accretion disk here. And this is a small movie of beta Lyrae. Very nice. Another movie is the movie of Algol. It's a 30 days binary, and again, a movie as a function of time. I think there is more than 20 dates for getting the orbits of these stars. And finally, a work that we have done with colleagues with the Merck is the observation of the famous FIPER system, which is a Be star with a disk, a very elongated disk. And it was known from observation with the Hubble Space Telescope that there is a very hot companion that was never seen. It was the companion is I think it's a 20,000 Kelvin stars orbiting these B stars here, and there was hypothesis about the constraint on the shape of the disk due to the companion. So the companion is very faint, is typically contribute to 3 or 4% of the flux, the total flux in the system. It has been detected by the MERKIX instrument because of the very good accuracy of the measurement made by this instrument. And what we have done, so this is in the H band here, and at the same time we have observed with the Vega instrument in the visible, and we can see the disk again with the same, typically the same orientation, the same shape, but of course not the same brightness distribution, because there is a huge difference in the visible band and in the infrared band. This is, in fact, the band inside the H-alpha line, surrounding the whole H-alpha line, where most of the emission of the disk is coming, at least in the visible. In the Vega data, in the visible, we were not able to have a correct determination of the companion, but we have some indications. So maybe if in the future, with a better instrument, we could do better and see this effect of the companion on the disk. But we have done a little bit more with this program. In fact, we have been able, in fact, to look not only at the integrated disk over the H-alpha line, but to make images of the disk at different spectral band inside the H-alpha line. And that's the next figure here. So if you look at this, you see the wavelength, and the center of the H-alpha line is here, and in the other direction, when you are in the red part of the line, almost all the light is coming. And in fact, what you are doing here is you are doing with the spectral selection, you are doing a selection of region of same radial velocity, or some velocity, in fact. And that's a way of having an interesting determination of the velocity field in the disk. And what you have here above, in this line here, and this line here is a model of a rotating disk in Keplerian rotation. And you see that, at least through phi, it's well matching the behavior of the thing. So, of course, the quality is not very nice, but look, you have only 0.2 nanometer in each of these bands here. Okay, so I think this is one of the results that we have obtained just 2 years ago with the Chara array, and the combination of interferometric observation from the Merck-X instrument, the Vega instrument. We have a new observation not on this star FIPER, but on the Betal array, the one that with the small movie. And that's very interesting because we have combined observation with the Merck-X instrument, the Vega instrument, and the NPOI interferometer. So the combination of all these things are promising very nice result on Betal array again, so that will be for the future. So I think I will stop here. So tomorrow I will explain you, and you will try to use the tools that are all behind this astrophysical program. You will see that this is not very complicated. These tools are taking all the dirty part of interferometer, making Fourier transform, looking at UV plane, etc. This is done in the tool. So tomorrow we will do that. We will use the preparation tools for doing optical interferometry observation. We will also use tools to find calibrators. So I will explain you what are these calibrators. And so we make some simulation and also some data analysis, in fact, to go from actual interferometric data to simple model.